is Richard Colson calling. How are you? Attention! Dave Henderson, Calvin Mosman, report to the bridge. Gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
You're there. Where's Calvin? I don't see Calvin. They're beautiful. There's the beauty is coming on. All right, Calvin. All right. So this is Calvin, everyone. This is a FileMaker certified amazing developer. This is Dave Henderson. This is like a unicorn, right? But he's also a FileMaker certified senior engineer. He's quite amazing. We do love Dave. So what are we doing today? We're having lots of fun. I'm going to press the button today. We are at fmtrain.tv, where every day we do awesome FileMaker training. Some days it's for beginners, some days for advanced, some days technical, some days like kind of esoteric communication, kind of weird stuff, which is kind of a today thing. So today is not so much technical. Tomorrow, if the schedule holds, should be explosively awesome. You guys are all going to want to pack your Depends undergarments because it's going to be explosively awesome. It should be quite good, but I'm waiting to get confirmation on certain things. So in the meantime, I'm going to bring up the live broadcast schedule. I'm going to move it over here out of the way like that so we can only see this part of it. So theoretically, today is talking about keeping your FileMaker clients off the rocks. When I say clients, it could be in-house, like your FileMaker developer, like say Kyle is, and he's working in-house to keep the people going and meeting their needs. And customers can get themselves in trouble, and a big part, it's all about communication, I think, really. Tomorrow is about where is FileMaker 20? How come I don't have FileMaker 20? Who should I complain at to get FileMaker 20? That should be what tomorrow is, theoretically. We're hoping that that's what happens tomorrow. And then tomorrow, the day after that, we have FileMaker Server Linux installation day 1, and we have Linux installation day 2. So that will be Jacob Taylor talking about installing FileMaker Server on Linux. So if you want to learn about Linux, do more about Linux, I think we could do the install in one day, but we're going to take questions along the way. So if you're not familiar with Linux, you're a Mac guy or Windows guy or gal, whatever, you want to ask the question, you could do that. So if you would like more dedicated specific training on specific topics, you want to help support the channel, I highly recommend that you reach out and check our websites. Once again, same website, fmtrain.tv. You got the live button over here. You want to come over here and hit the bundles, and we have these complete training bundles, which has 90 hours of video training, which is really great. We really appreciate all of you out there. A bunch of you watching have purchased this. I want to thank you. It's those purchases to help keep all this running, which is really, really, really great. And so because of that, we can keep the lights on, which is really nice. I got Dave here. I also have Calvin here. So today's conversation, really, it's a two-way. It's like three of us here talking, but it's really, I want to see the dialogue, and I haven't popped it up over here. I really kind of need to do that, Margaret. I'm kind of slow on the uptake over here, but I want to pop open Twitch and YouTube, and then make sure that we, if people have comments, it's a kind of an ongoing conversation. So here I'm looking at Dave, but over this way I'm looking at the conversation. I got Carol in Oakland. Welcome, Carol. But yeah, we want to be able to, if you have questions or comments or thoughts about this stuff, get your feedback so we can incorporate your ideas or questions in flight while we're doing it. We got Ruben there, we got Tawa from New Zealand, and then Michelle from Montreal, which is great. So I'm popping out these chats. So I'm literally watching, for those of you wondering about this, it's like air traffic control from hell. I'm actually watching 3 different conversations in parallel, plus talking to 3 people. So I'm doing 6 things at once. The conversation today is about, it really leads to this overarching thing, and we talk about it in the book, wherever my book went, but I determined that this job, doing the FileMaker job, in my limited opinion of doing this for 30 years, is about third technical. We spend a vast majority of our time on this live stream talking about the technical aspects of building FileMaker solutions, right? And so, there we go, there's Calvin there. And so, because of these technical aspects, we focus on that, but a third of it, I would say easily a third of the job is communication. And then I would put the last third as work ethic, because I've run into a lot of people over the years who really, they're like, oh God, I don't want to get up this morning. Oh, I got to build something for a customer. Oh God, I got to bring myself to do it. It's too much work. Oh, so I actually list that in there. So it's kind of all the internal dialogue. If you're a psychologist, you know, all the internal voices that you hear. My voices are all dead. They don't say too much. They say fly helicopters, all they say. And then be nice to Calvin and Dave, right? So, but some people's voices are kind of counter to that. They want to play games, screw around. So we list you need to be focused and working hard, and that's kind of like a third of the battle, right? So the third that we're talking about today is really kind of the communication communication component of the conversation. It's not technical. And so happy customers are customers who have their expectations met or exceeded. But let's just stick with met. Keep it easy. And so they expect that they're going to buy FileMaker, you're going to build something, and they're going to make $1 billion. If that's their expectation, you need to work on towards getting them to that goal. The trick is that frequently they might give you like a very broad expectation, like, hey, I want to like save a lot of money and not have to work so many hours, and my staff can be more efficient. Okay. But so how do you get to that? How do you get to that? It really gets this issue. I popped the image up here a little bit early. It's like you almost have to pin down your customer and interrogate them. And so this is kind of a very G-rated interrogation. It gets worse from here. But the point is that a lot of times you have customers who can fundamentally communicate well. Then you have customers who fundamentally can't even communicate to their spouses and they're divorced, right? And so if they're not going to communicate to their spouse very well, how well are they going to communicate to you? And so poor communicators. Now, if you're also a developer and you're a poor communicator, then you've got a really serious problem. You've got to learn as a developer how to communicate. It's a third of your job. Third technical, a third of it is communication, right? So the question is, how do you get the information out of your customers? So let me throw it. Dave, if you're going to get information, we got Calvin. Let's start with Calvin. I got this picture here. If I'm going to, Calvin, you're like, I know you're working with a lot of existing customers right now, but, well, or even existing customers, but new customers, what are the tricks you use to try to get them to tell you what they want? And it's very open-ended. Yeah.
Yeah. So two really important questions I ask them is one, what's your workflow? What processes do you go through? And then but really, and sometimes they can't even explain that. So then we ask what are they trying to do? And another one that's probably even more important would be, what is your pain point? And what is the thing that you need to do or you're trying to do that causes the most pain?
I want to encourage that. I'd kind of forgotten about that. I'm gonna pop this back over here, Calvin, real quick. So it's totally true that you will sit down with customers or people and say, what is your workflow? And they have never organized it in their head. It's not organized on paper. They just show up and do their job. Their job was probably trained to them with tribal knowledge, like where one person told the other person, none of it's written down. They say, show me the documentation on your business processes, and this is what you get, a blank piece of paper. There's nothing on the paper. And so the issue is that for them to explain what their workflow is now, if they can, or what it should be. And if you can't get them to do that, you definitely want to identify the pain points, because if you can target the friction, we call it in business, it's called friction. I used to say pain. Claris yelled at me, said I couldn't use that. It sounded bad. And then Claris started using pain in and of themselves. So some of the staff left, different people came in like, yeah, use pain, it's great. So I'm like, all right. So Carol says 1/3 communication, 1/3 technical. The other third is self work ethic or self motivation. I don't know. It's some people have it in spades. Like people always tell me I'm a very busy person. I'm always going, right? You know, if you already look at me, I've already flown to Hayward today, flew an hour and a half in a Jet Ranger, flew my back, put the helicopter up, jumped in the car, hauled down the freeway, got here, coordinated with the team. I'm very busy. I don't have a slow setting. If I'm slow, you guys might want to check for a pulse, right? Because he might be not here anymore. But some people, they really have a hard time being motivated individuals. And so kind of I was taking the holistic, if you were like a professional business person, you'd say, oh, it's a half technical, half communication. But really, I find that the other part that jams, they could be great communicators, they could be great technically, but they're like, oh God, I worked about 25 hours this week. It's about all I can handle. I might melt if I have to work anymore. It's so hard. And I know people like that. It's just the way it is. So if you want to be successful, you have to have all three pieces of it. Anyway, so interesting. So comments along the way. So Dave, so Calvin, any final? I mean, not final. We're just going to jump around a little bit. Thoughts on that? Trying to get that information out of people.
Yeah, usually with identifying a pain point, when you ask them what the pain point is, they usually can tell you what that is pretty much right away. This is the thing that causes us frustration. And while they might not be able to explain workflow, they know where what's causing the pain. and then it identifies low hanging fruit and some of the first things that we can work on and smooth out
Tip.
their workflow.
Another hot tip, low-hanging fruit. So when you're working with a customer, you're establishing a relationship with the customer. When you first start off, it's like your first date. I don't know if you even remember your first date, but first date, you're like, should we even be around this guy? I don't know if I can. Should I give him my number? I don't know. He might be a stalker, right? So you're trying to establish that you're a trustworthy, technically competent, good communicator, a good human, right? Very loose terms, good human. And so what you want to do is to establish that. Don't try to solve the most complicated problem initially as a developer. Pick some low-hanging fruit, get some success, then build upon that success. So low-hanging fruit being easy things that are easy to implement that would be highly valued. That would be highly valued, right? Carol, you understand my concept about the one-third, 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 right? It's in the book under page, wherever my book went, but it's on page like 200 or something around there, 198 or something. Cool. So Dave, I'm going to jump to Dave real quick. Dave Henderson, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Talk to me about customer interrogations. How do you interrogate customers?
I agree with Calvin. My personal thing is I don't call it workflow, I call it business model. And that is the thing that I probably work the hardest at, is understanding their business model. You do have to figure out or get communicated to you what the person's pain point is. But if you understand their workflow or their business model, it gives that information context, if you know what I mean. For instance, the pattern I usually see is somebody will call me and I tell them right off, I need to understand your business model. I'm going to ask you hundreds of questions. You need to be patient with that, because the better I understand your business model, the better and the quicker I will be able to serve your need and get you out of here with what you want for as little money as possible. Because nobody wants to throw money at you.
Right.
They don't want to do that. On the other hand, just on an attitude thing, I'm trying to make a living as a developer. And so I'm trying to get as much money out of that customer as I can, but they have to be happy that they did it. If they pay me and they're not happy they paid me, I still failed.
That's a fail.
That's a fail. And so,
So what we want to do is we want to be happily paying Henderson, right? So we just start shelling out, $100 bills, and then Dave, you can start dancing for me. I'm going to put these in your pants, right? So here we go.
Exactly. And when people are trying to explain their business model to me, I take notes because I'm old. I need to take notes. And it shows the customer that you're paying attention, that you're at least pretending to care what they're talking about. And after I get that information, I go to a couple of different applications I have on my computer, and I diagram that stuff out and I send it back to them. And the question is, does this represent what you told me?
Yep. So Peter Geens asked a question: are customers open to new ideas if they stick with their ideas, even if they are wrong or not good enough? So here's part of the FileMaker business. So if you're coding in Oracle, I've talked to other people who do this. If Ruben's around, Ruben is not around right now. But a lot of times if you're a big Oracle team, you're building one little screw or cog in a solution. With FileMaker, because it's low code, you get to build the entire solution end to end if you want. Generally, one developer builds the whole thing. Maybe two developers build the whole thing. Very rarely do you have 5 people working on it. If you do, you probably have a very seriously disorganized operation. So, but the point is that you have the ability to make the tool work for the customer, but also understand where the friction points are. And as you see them identify specific items, they identify items for you. You may come up with alternate ways of solving it better. You might want to show that to them. It's like why starting point. Like there are competitors of RCC who use FM starting point and say, hey, we got this really great CRM, right? And they fail to mention that it comes from not my company. I've actually been in competing bidding wars with other companies bidding work on starting point as opposed to us. And we created it, and we know more about it than anyone else. It's really funny. What you're going to find out, because the way FileMaker's low code, is that you are partially a coder and partially a business consultant. Now, if you're brand new, like one of our brand new coaches, the coaches can't really give you guidance on business processes. But because I have worked in event planning and hotel services and warehouse services and manufacturing and transportation, all these other companies and legal services and medical services. You start to see how these businesses work. You come up with ideas from other places how to help your customer. So as you get more experience, you should charge more money per hour, separate conversation. But generally, you're going to be able to provide more guidance to the customer on a successful business fix. Hopefully, they are looking for that. Now, if they're looking for you to like turn these screws and bolt this together, it works the way, like say someone comes to me and says, it works the way we want it to work. It's built in FileMaker 5. I want you to rebuild it identically in FileMaker 19. I'm like, as long as they say on the piece of paper that they want it to work identically without improvement, we will rebuild it for them. But generally, we're trying to give them suggestions, and hopefully they understand that those suggestions could be valid. They might want to explore that. Do you make a flowchart for business processes? Absolutely. That's one of the number one things I try to do. Dave, you want to take a swing at that? Flowcharts, diagrams?
I make flowcharts, I make diagrams, especially with this last year with COVID thing. We haven't been able to meet very many people face to face. And emails are great things. Don't get me wrong, email is vital to our job. But there's one thing that email cannot do for you. You can't gauge somebody's intent or mood or their lack of understanding through an email because you can't see their face.
Correct.
And so the way I made up for that is I diagram things. This is what you told me your business model is. I diagram it. I send it to them. Is this accurate? Does this accurately represent what you told me? And if they say yes, great. And if they say no, I say, well, we're going to have a go-to meeting. We're going to share screens. We're going to fix it because it's vital for me to understand this stuff. That not only makes it easier to do my job, it is the thing that rarely gets talked about as far as customer management is the fact that it's ultimately about a relationship. You build a relationship between you and the customer. And all this other stuff that we've talked about so far and stuff we're going to be talking about later is all part of that. I know that's going to be too touchy-feely for some people, but ultimately your ability to serve the customer and the customer's willingness to pay you for your service is based on trust. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum. You have to work to build that.
Yeah.
And you build that through the various types of communication you'd use, whether it's a go-to meeting, a phone call, an email, or whatever. For instance, I never ignore a customer. If a customer sends me an email and he says, oh, I have a problem with this, even if I can't deal with it right then, I have a standard thing I say, I'm on it. And that way they know that I heard them. Just being heard goes a long way.
I can't tell you the number of people, and I have a couple engineers at RCC who we actually tightly regulate how they operate because they frequently can't do that. We've actually worked hard, kind of frankly, at RCC to get rid of the engineers who you've told them 100 times. They say customer emails you, reply back immediately, even if you can't work on it. And I'm down to basically one person or 1.5 people out of 30 who tends to still default to that if you give them the opportunity. And it just results in unhappy customers, pissed off customers. And as a boss, as a manager, you're going to hire people, but you won't know they have that propensity until you've kind of played with them or run with them for 2 or 3 or 4 months or 5 months or 6 months. You start to see established behaviors. And so as a manager, it's a trick. You got to find the right people. But if you're like hiring a consultant or hiring a developer, you want to find one that has great customer. And all of them every one of the people that I know that has a communication problem would tell you, oh, I'm the most amazing communicator on the planet. I walk on water. I'm like, God or something on communication. And then they promptly trip on themselves and fall over. And someone trips once, you're like, eh. Someone trips twice, you're like wondering if you got a problem, right? Everyone trips once in a while, but it's actually, it gets back to that 1/3 I was talking to Carol about. 1/3 technical, 1/3 communication, and this 1/3 of personal work ethic. I would file the prompt response to customers and kind of doing what you're saying. Those are like integrity issues, right? That goes down that bottom third that's personal that I can't fix for you. If you're fundamentally a broken person, we can't fix that. If you're not a good communicator, we can explain to you how to be a good communicator. If you don't know how to build a FileMaker solution, we'll explain that to you and you'll learn it. But if fundamentally that bottom third, you don't want to go to work, you don't want to work hard, and when people talk to you, you want to ignore them and sit in your little cubicle, right? Then you shouldn't be a consultant, right? I'm not being a dick about this, but there are people, my office manager who retired a couple, 2, 3 years ago, Deb Haggerty, for those of you remember her, she used to say, oh, they're like a cube rat. And she goes, I go, what? It's a someone that sits in a cubicle and you slide food and water and snacks under the cubicle wall, like it's all walled all the way in. That way the person doesn't have to talk to anyone. They just build what they build. You send them some money under the cubicle, give them their paycheck, send some food under there, and out comes code whenever, right? And in the FileMaker consultancy, that's a fail. You will fail. You cannot be that person. You might be okay at a big company where you're going to code, like you work for Google, and you're going to code the 3D rendering around this building, something like that. But boy, I tell you, if you have to communicate with customers, it's so important. It's so important. So Peter Geen says, does it mean that if the feeling isn't right, you abort the relationship or project? You know, you should spend some time with the person. I'm going to make a couple comments, Calvin, and maybe you want to jump on this a little bit. But when I was younger, so say I was like starting off my consultancy and I was more like Megan's age. And is Megan even here? Megan's not there. Is Jake's there? Megan's not there. Jake's there. So when I was Megan's age, I would actually go and I didn't have enough experience, but I actually on my own time, I would volunteer and go work at the customer's business, helping them to learn their workflow. I did this a couple of times. Now, as you got older, you start to understand how things work. Like what's an invoice? What is really an invoice? What are receivables? What's a SKU? If someone says a SKU, what's the acronym and what does it mean? What's a pick list? All this sort of stuff. You start to learn this stuff. But to get that experience, sometimes I remember going to this one business and volunteering, and I sat behind the counter as a cash register, being a cash register person, learning that job for a week, and how the business worked. And actually, it was funny. It was one of these. It's fun, such a funny business. It's a regulated business. It was the pawn shop business. So where people go in, they get hard up, they need some money, so they're going to turn in some giant. They're going to trade in like a fancy musical instrument and get a loan for 3 months, and then they come back and pay the loan back. So I learned about loans. I learned about storing products, about inventory control, about invoicing, all the sorts of stuff I learned over the course of a week. And it found out it was a very regulated business. It wasn't a free-for-all. It was like very specific regulations on how they could conduct business, at least within the state of California. And so going into the business and doing it face-to-face is super educational, and it helps cut through that process. If you have a customer that's willing to spend the money and you want to be paid for your time and do it, you don't want to volunteer, have that conversation with the customer. But it's worthwhile to go down there for a couple days. I did it for a week, super educational, but I'm not 25 anymore, right? So Calvin, how do you get the information that you need?
Yeah, so I guess getting information that you need, a lot of times you ask them for their spreadsheets that they're using, for different maybe screenshots of different apps that they're looking at, and different tools that they're using. Sometimes clients using 5 different tools, and then in FileMaker, we're trying to solve those 5 different problems in one place. And sometimes we'll ask them even to draw up a little picture of what they're imagining, and then we take that picture and we'll maybe draw something. Well, this is how it could look in FileMaker, and that back and forth can get the information that that we're looking for. But back to the question, he said, Peter Geen said, does it mean if the feeling isn't right, you abort the relationship or the project? And sometimes that is the case. If you can't do anything to make somebody happy, sometimes we do everything we can to make them happy, and no matter how good it is, they won't be happy. If they can't be happy, then it's just not worth.
It has to be a win-win conversation. So There's some obvious ones that come up. So I've a couple times I've had one of them I'm pretty sure was Russian mafia, but I can't swear to it. But he was very Russian. He was working in downtown San Francisco, and he gets on the phone and he has a FileMaker system, and he says, "I want all this stuff done." I'm like, "Good, good." And he goes, "It will take, 8.5 hours." I'm like, "What?" Right? I'm like, it'll take what? He goes, "Yes, it'll take 8.5 hours." And I'm like, how do we know that? If you know that, if you really know that, then just go build it yourself, right? Just go build it yourself. It'll take 8.5. I looked at it, it was probably easily double that. And so I don't know if the guy had been burned by other people or not, but when you get weird moments like that where you realize that you're the hostage, probably just don't want to even go down there. You're just, just too big. It's just, I'd rather have some days off than have a customer that is unhappy with us, or we're unhappy with them, right? Some people go through life and they feel like you have to lose so they can win. And there's books about where you talk about this win-win thing, and actually it says quadrant where you win, they lose, you win together, or the other person wins and you lose, or you win, whatever, and then everyone loses, which normally is where everything ends. Normally everything ends in a lose-lose if you don't keep it in the win-win column, which means that whenever there's a discussion or negotiation going on, you generally kind of have, both the parties have to be generally pretty happy, right? You never get everything you want. But at the same time, if you don't get enough, right? So like if say, for example, I'm going to pick a random number, say your hourly rate is $125 an hour. My rate is not that, but just say your hourly rate is $25 an hour. And the guy says, and your potential customer says, "Oh, well, I think your rate should be 115. And so that's like less than you want to take. Do you really want to take it? But so then you tell the customer, well, then I need a commitment from you for a block of time. Oh, so you're going to kind of get a win with more work, right? I've actually just had that conversation today with the guy with that Jet Ranger, right? And so certain prices are more negotiable if you buy a bigger block of time. So you both get a win. They get a discount, but you're going to get a commitment for more time. So you've got to look at these things. If it's just like, I want you to make, 125 is your hour, but I want $100 an hour, and I want you to give a fixed cost quote, and I'm not going to tell you what you really have to do on it. That happens too. I have this with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and they go, "We need a quote from you how much this work will take," and they ask me for a page. They give me a page of written stuff. Build us an invoice system. Build us an inventory control system. Build this, build that. It's like these one sentences, right? All ain't that piece of paper. Give us a quote. And I'm like, how about 40 hours for us to figure out what you even want to do, right? And they go, well, someone else gave us a quote for $30,000. I'm like, I said, anyone who gives you a quote on that information is a fraud. That's fraudulent. They are deliberately making things up, because that's not, you cannot justify anything, right? Make me an invoice system. Holy shit, are you kidding? So Scott K says, does RCC ever build small proofs of concept? Not so much anymore, because we have Starting Point. Kind of like, that's our business card. It's like, here's the business card. It's free. Take it. If we have a very specific technology demonstrator, say we wanted FileMaker to talk to a tractor driving in a field on a laser level, and it has to some sort of special integration, we might do a prototype project just to make sure, to prove even to ourselves that we can get FileMaker to talk wirelessly to the tractor with IoT, with the automatic robotic driver in the tractor, whatever, right? So I would do a prototype. If you get older, you'll see where the dicey parts of a project are. It's like, it's a little dicey trying to FileMaker talk to an artificial intelligence driving a tractor. That could be a problem. Anything with inventory, warehousing, stuff like that, no problem, because we've done that. You have the experience. So yeah, I would do a prototype to demonstrate, even to ourselves, that you can complete the project, which leads us to one of our biggest roles in the company, right? Dave, are you there? I'm going to throw it back to Dave real quick. Dave, are you there? What's the biggest role in the company, right? You know where I was going to lead with that. You were listening, right?
I
Yes.
was listening, but there
So,
a couple things
so
come to mind.
I would be, so say that they give us a bunch of specs, build us an invoice system, no problem. Build us an inventory system, no problem. We want you to connect to IoT, to an artificial intelligence on a robot that's driving a tractor through a field of corn, right?
Hmm.
And so what would we say to the customer, right?
You're not getting a fixed quote from me based on the information that I have.
That's one. What's the other one? You want to be upfront that you have never built, right? We never make
Yeah.
promises about things that we've never built before, right?
Do
Um,
not promise something you have not personally done ever. Not once in your life. You will regret it.
and I
Don't do
guarantee
it.
there's someone watching this video right now who's done that today. You've made a promise. You're like, oh, well, the customer will think I'm a weak developer and I'm not very good if I don't promise I can do this, right? And
Being perceived as weak is way better than being perceived as a liar. Pick one. Don't promise anything you haven't personally done. Don't do it.
so, yeah, I was saying tough love from Dave Henderson. Tough love from Dave Henderson. Yeah, totally agree. Carol says, what are your thoughts about waterfall versus agile? I think government organization, this back to like the Lawrence Livermore Labs thing, right? They send me this one-page quote, which is unquotable, totally unquotable, totally unquotable. Or I get another one from like Yum. Once upon a time, Yum owns Taco Bell and Pizza Hut. They give me this quote, and page 8 of the quote says, "You don't have to worry about any iPad or Android or mobile devices." That's on page 8, and then on page 25 of the quote, way back, it says, "You're required to ensure proper compliance with iOS." And I'm like, right? And so frequently the documentation you get is incomplete or inconsistent or just horrible. Doing waterfall is where you have a big quote and you do this big development and you dump it on their head. We generally don't ever do that anymore. We generally don't provide fixed cost quotes anymore. It used to be that I was like, well, customers won't, take the customers' requirements, especially with FileMaker, because it's low code and things get done so easily. It's a moving set of requirements for a customer whenever they start, like, I need this and I need this, and you pin them down, right? And then they start to see all the great stuff FileMaker does, and they'll go, well, can it do this too? And that'll just take you a little bit of extra time, Dave, extra 10 minutes. Just do this little thing for me and this extra little report. Oh my God, I could do this, and it can fill out this, and I can use a barcode to do this, right? And so suddenly your one week of work is turned into 5 weeks of work real fast. And if you're having a fixed cost conversation, you're constantly telling the customer, no, it's not in there. No, kiss my ass, no. And that's such a hard conversation to have with the customer. Whereas if you're doing agile, so the flip side of this, you're doing agile, you build a piece, it's really not even agile, it's waterfall versus spiral is the proper analogy. Spiral development is where you really don't know what's going to happen. You build a relationship with them, you're building the solution, and every 3 days or 4 days or every day, depending on your schedule, you're letting them log on and play with it. So we typically always build it on a FileMaker server, so it's backed up. So if we crash, we don't have a problem. The customer can log on and play with certain areas of it as we're building other areas, and then we let them play with pieces along the way, so you start getting consistent feedback. But what the customer will do, it's invariable. It always happens. It'll go, well, can't we have this and can't we have this? So you get scope creep. And then what happens is that they keep scope creeping, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they love it. And then they're pissed that they've spent way more money that they wanted to spend, and somehow it's your fault. That is a very common occurrence. And you have to remind them, it's like, well, it's like a taxi. If you don't want to pay for the taxi anymore, we stop, you get out, and I don't drive you around anymore, right? It literally is that simple, right? So,
And also part of that, an idea to keep in mind as the feature creep or scope creep happens, is to try to keep your client on task and say, let's focus on this first, and let's focus on this feature, and instead of just chasing every shiny object and every new idea.
Yeah, you have to enforce a little bit of discipline. And so, once again, you have to have the personal wherewithal. Once again, that's that bottom third, Carol. Once again, you have to have the courage or the confidence or whatever you want to call that to tell the customer who probably has a lot more experience than you do in this specific area, sir, ma'am, we have to, you need to focus on this other piece so we can get this one piece done. We don't really want to jump over here yet. We need you to focus on this one. Once we do this, I promise we'll go over here and deal with this. Once again, if you're doing spiral development, and with agile, they're seeing it frequently, repeatedly, right? And they're giving feedback, right? But spiral is where it kind of, but I've had customers who started off, oh, I'm going to spend 30 grand, and their vision of what they want keeps expanding, and then they have to have the budget to support that. And it happens to every last person in the world. It happens to. I was at an Apple meeting. God, this is 15 years ago, and so it was an event planning group down there who doesn't exist anymore. They all got blown up on a reorganization, but they were down there doing event planning for the Apple stores. And the main lady who was there would go, "Hey, Richard, we could do this," and so I had it kind of done, and they were kind of accepting it. And she goes, "Well, we could do this." And I'd had a conversation with earlier in the meeting, like every time you ask for something new, it's more money. And so she had her little, I don't want to say minions, I don't want to be derogatory, but they were her like support people, or they worked for her, they were assistants, but some of them were technical. And some of them could do FileMaker, they just weren't as good as I was, for example. So they brought me in, they would do the basic stuff, but I came in and did the heavy lifting. And so they knew that every time she opened her mouth to ask for something new, it was going to cost Apple Inc. more money. And so they're in the meeting, and she would be talking, this is great, oh, can we do this? And in the back of the corner of the meeting, I hear the voice go, cha-ching! Loudly in the meeting, and everyone's like, what the hell? It's like, oh, nothing, it's just more money being spent. Okay, fine, no, you guys knock that off. So she proceeds to ask for 5 more things, and they keep going cha-ching in the back. By the time they were done, she was pissed off. She was pissed that they kept making cha-ching noises in the meeting. It was true. It was totally true. It was so funny. And I'm sitting there laughing because this is an internal Apple meeting, and I'm the outside guy going, yeah, it's more cha-ching, baby. It's more cha-ching. And they're cha-chinging and just pissing her off. It was so funny. And it was true though. So the person who's asking for this stuff sometimes doesn't want you to tell them it's more money. How is there any strategy for how do you explain that to them nicely where they don't want to wring your neck? I mean, I don't know what to say, right?
The magic words I've learned to use is phase 1.
Phase 1. Ah.
Yes, sir.
So we're completing phase. So we had completed phase 1. She was asking about a phase 2. We'd have to add this into phase 2. And phase 2 is obviously, since it's a phase, is more money, right? That's not a bad idea.
Hey, it happens.
So Agent Chevy liked one of your quotes, Dave. Once again, quotable quote. By the way, I do write these quotes down on the wall. I have quotes from various people we've interviewed. I write them in here, but they go on a whiteboard. Dave said, is one of the things better. So in terms of you promising something you haven't done before, Dave's quote was, people don't want to do that. They don't want to appear weak or inexperienced. And Dave said, it's better to look weak than to be seen as a liar, or to look like a liar, or to be seen as a liar, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, one is kind of not great, but it's not awesome. And an experienced manager, as an experienced manager, I can say this now, I expect people not to be able to do everything, and I prefer them when they push back and say they can't. But when you're younger, you don't know that. You're like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I got to say yes, I got to say yes, I got to say yes. You don't have to say yes.
No, you don't. The other thing to be aware of is when people are stressed, it doesn't happen every project, but it happens on a lot of them. Somebody on one end or the other gets stressed, and usually it's the customer, because you know what you're doing, or at least that's what you tell yourself, because you're the developer, and you don't know what the source of that stress is. For instance, I've lost track of the times I've been yelled at by somebody because somebody above them was yelling at them. It had nothing to do with my work. It had nothing to do with the expectation I had with my main contact person. It was all about this person trying to get somebody else off their back.
Yep.
That stuff happens all the time. And under stress, the average human being, and most of us are pretty average, are going to go to the lowest common denominator. And so that disconnect that you had between some feature you told them they could do and one you didn't deliver, it isn't going to be seen as a misunderstanding. They're not going to couch it in those terms. Not when they're under stress. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That's not the way human beings work.
Yeah, and so for Carol, it's one of the biggest things that you run into. Waterfall is great, except the customers at the end generally don't get what they want because along the way they see a bunch of things they could do, make better, and that's not part of the project, and so it waits to the end maybe, or you start issuing change orders, and if you issue a bunch of change orders, then basically you've got a spiral development anyway. I think spiral development is the way to go. Having the customer understand where they are at in terms of spending money and where they're going to be going, things like that. I'm not going to get into some of the internal processes RCC has, but you need to come up with a plan on how to make sure that the customer knows where you're at, where you're going, what you're doing, and they need to give you some sort of written approval as they start to do stuff. A lot of times they'll like, Billy, we give them an itemized invoice and there's like 3 or 4 hours for some other thing in there. And they go, what is this for? We never approved this. And if you have an email from the customer that said it was approved, a lot of times we will copy and paste and stick that right into our timesheets, and it gets loaded into the support documentation on the invoice, so we can go, well, that 4 hours is right here, and here's your email saying go do this, and you acknowledge it's 4 hours, right? And so they're like, rawr, rawr. They're still mad, but they're not mad at you. They're mad because their budget's getting destroyed, because they're mad because they want more shit they can't afford, because FileMaker is so awesome. Listen, if FileMaker sucked, this would never be a problem. Be like, oh, who wants more of this? This is horrible, right? But FileMaker is a fantastic tool at the end of the day. When you get past all the little warts and things that we complain about, it's really a fantastic tool. If it sucked, no one would ask for more stuff. So it's a good problem to have. But it is a problem. You have to learn to work to manage that, right? Calvin, give us wisdom, baby.
Another great thing to figure out would be the return on investment that a client will have with their project. So if they're spending money, you want to show them that they are saving money or that they're making money, and see how that's going to affect their business process. So in one instance, I had a client that they were the way that they were working with the app was that they had people going through projects really fast, and so as if we could do anything to speed up any little process that would speed up the time that they could finish that task in the app, would result in time saved for each of those users, and that we could put an hour based on their hourly rate. This is the time saved, and this is the money saved, and they were able to complete this many more projects because of whatever changes we made. So return on investment, or ROI, is a really good thing to try to figure out how you can explain how you can show it, and then it shows them the return that they're getting on the money that they're spending on the app and the development.
That's good stuff, definitely. Let me pop that down there like that. So I keep refilling my drink because I'm talking a lot. I'm already starting to lose my voice. So ROI, return on investment, very, very valuable. If you can show that to them, listen, the customer still may be out of money, but they won't be so aggravated about it, right? So I think that's useful. At the end of the day, there's only so much money in the piggy bank, right? I mean, these stacks of money over here, these stacks right here are $10,000, right? There's only so many a customer has to apply to a project. Regardless of how many of these you save, if you're saving them, then they will kind of recharge over a period of time and they'll have more. And so the best kind of meeting or customer is one where you do some work, they start saving money, and then you come back 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months later, whatever you do, and they spend some more with you because they have kind of recharged the money that they're saving and they realize the value you provide. Ruben says, FileMaker is the ultimate tool for doing agile-ish development instead of waterfall. Indeed, customers change their minds all the time. I have to make myself internally flexible. I got to write that one down. Internally flexible every week because we come up with better ideas we couldn't even known about the beginning of the track a project. He says, I'm stubborn sometimes, so I need to be flexible. So that's that 1/3, right? It's this 1/3. I don't know. Do I have the book anywhere in here? I really got to find the book. But the book, we talk about that. It's like 1/3 tech, 1/3 kind of communicating. And this 1/3 is everything else, work ethic and your internal dialogue with yourself and not making promises you can't keep, stuff like that. So Ruben, really good. So Ruben has an issue where he kind of gets set in his ways and he doesn't want to be flexible, so he has to try to be more flexible. Know thyself, right? I don't know what the Latin is for that. That's somewhere on something, but know thyself, very important. And if you have an issue like that, then you want to pitch to your strengths. Every one of you have strengths. Some of you are good at this thing, better at some things. I'm a better people person and manager than I am super deep coder. Obviously, you can tell that. I've done the super deep code before, so when Calvin tries to pull some fast shit on me, like, hey, look at this. This is going to make you $1 billion, right? Check it out. And it's like a go-to. It's like print. Calvin is awesome, and then that's line 10. Then line 20 says go to 10, and it's going like that. And I'm like, Calvin, as a developer, previous developer, I know bullshit when I see it, right? But you've got to. That's one thing about managers. Never mind. Don't get me started on that, but. Know thyself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, pitch to your strengths. Figure out what those are, pitch to them. All right, so you divide projects into modules. Yeah, we will say that we divide them into phases or modules, whatever terminology the customer likes. Dave, do you break them down? Calvin, you want to hit that real quick, or Dave, one of you guys?
Yeah, definitely. The based on either the budget or a feature or a problem that we're solving, we can base that on phases. Sometimes phase 1 will focus on FileMaker development, and then phase 2 will focus on connecting FileMaker with something else.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And so your phase 1 should be more low-hanging fruit, shall we say, to help establish the relationship that Dave was talking about. I'm gonna jump back to Dave. Talking about the relationship, building a relationship. Phase 1 should be things that help you build the relationship, right? And then anything that's a little bit more technically challenging. Say that you're really a great API person, but you're still talking to an API service you've never talked to before. You would be upfront with the customer saying, hey, I do all this API stuff, but I've not talked to this specific DocuSign or some clone of DocuSign or something, right? Something that Claire's Connect conveniently doesn't talk to, so you have to write it yourself, right, Dave?
Yes. Yes, that's right. One of the other things that I work on is I try to make myself a team member with the customer. I tend to have long-term customers as opposed to short-term customers. I've had customers for 10, 15 years out of whack for most of my career working with RCC. And at first I thought that it was happening by accident, but then I discovered one of my customers told me, he told me the reason that we go long term with you is that you make yourself part of the team. You're always asking us about, if there are any new problems. You're always suggesting a good way to fix it. If we ask you to do something and you don't know, you always get back to us. It's all about making the customer perceive that you care. And that does a couple things. It makes them more willing to spend money. It makes them more willing to forgive you if something doesn't work out, because if you are a developer for long enough, something is going to fail to work out. Trust me, I've had hundreds of things not work out. I've been working for RCC for 25 years or so, and every mistake that is out there short of shooting a customer, I've done it. So.
Yeah. And so it's one of the things I always talk to people about. It's like, once again, we're back to kind of your internal monologue about stuff. Some people are like, I'm going to build it, and it'll work, and if it doesn't work, it's okay. The customer will forgive me. Okay, so let me give you a little insight into this. FileMaker, the product, the platform, has enough issues on its own without you adding to it. It's got enough bugs. Claire's in the process of probably shipping another version. And theoretically, we've been testing that. We found a couple bugs with their shipping version. It'll never be perfect. It'll always theoretically get better. But you need to save your ammo for things you can't control, right? So if you can control a positive outcome and you have a propensity towards being slightly lazy, Work hard not to do that, not to be that person, because you're going to need the good graces and forgiveness of the customer when FileMaker breaks. Not you, it breaks. It does whatever it does, and it causes a problem. If you've already used up all your customer, I am sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and you're forgiven, and then FileMaker blows up on top of it, you got a real serious problem. You have a real serious problem. We had an issue with a customer. I'm not going to get into the customer's name, but they make aircraft, big manufacturer, huge, and we there was some challenges I had with some staffing at the time that's not here, and the engineers just were not great communicators, and so a lot of the rules that we're talking about got broke, and so we finally got attached to a really good engineer, and we're in this project, and we ran into a bug which I have not seen since, but it's kind of a unique bug, and that is where you can, you always make the statement that you can never run a script that can damage a FileMaker file, right? Like, no matter worry about you could maybe crash FileMaker, but actually in terms of damaging the file where it won't reopen, I've done it. I found that. I know what it is. You can do it. It's with web publishing, certain versions of FileMaker. I've never tried it with 18, but it definitely would do it with 17. Whenever you're doing custom web publishing, you tell it to go to a specific layout. It has to render the layout. So you normally render a layout which is really lightweight, doesn't have a lot of stuff on it. Well, my engineer was sending it to a layout with a lot of on-screen script triggers, which would fire, right? And a lot of calculations that would fire, things like that. And the overall sheer mass of calculation and stuff that the web publishing engine was doing in rendering the layout as it was talking to the web publishing engine would cause FileMaker to close the file and report the file was damaged. And when you tried to reopen it, it would not reopen. It says use the recover command. And the recover command, as I remember, wouldn't fix it. It was bad. And what it ended up being is that you end up having to make a clone of the file, would reset the file, then re-import the data. It was a hideously bad bug, and I was the guy who actually finally triaged it because the engineers couldn't figure it out. They'd roll to a backup from a couple days ago. They'd start work all over again, and then it would blow up, and then the file would report as damage, and they'd have to go to a backup before that. And I had to chase that down. So there's going to be times out there when things are going to get ugly, and you need to make sure that the customer is already happy with you. So when you have to apologize to the customer for whatever's going on that may not be your fault, the customer's not already pissed off with the 12 other things that you could have avoided. You could have avoided this, right? You understand what I'm saying? So I hate to be like lecturing, but that's kind of where this conversation is good. So yeah, good. Yeah, Stu says good tip. Try not to discharge a firearm into a customer. Yeah, that's great. Right. So, but yeah, that was an interesting bug. I don't know if it ever got fixed. It was one of those that was so obscure because the engineer was doing some weird stuff he shouldn't have been doing anyway. But it literally resulted in a script that would end up setting an internal flag. The file wasn't damaged, but there was an internal flag that would trip that would report, oh, the file is damaged. And it wasn't. And we wrote it up. We sent to Claris. Claris said they couldn't reproduce it. Went round and round and round. If I could have got down into the building, I would have done that. Gone into the building and said, watch it. Here it is. And they would have, oh, shit. I think Claris today, right now, if you had this issue and went and showed it to them, they would fix it. They are much more customer-centric and responsive about mission-critical customer failures. I don't have any of those right now, but I'm just telling you, it's partly what our presentation about is tomorrow. There's a big piece of that. There's stuff that you folks don't know about, and I gave the presentation to Claris. They didn't object to me talking about it. So anyway, they were warned. So if they don't like it, then they all had a chance to veto my presentation for tomorrow. It's a big presentation for tomorrow. Calvin, Dave, final thoughts.
I'll say one more thing. You can file this under stuff that old people say. Don't forget about what I call the 1 to 50 rule. The 1 to 50 rule is it takes 50 attaboys to get rid of one And so don't let laziness, lack of due diligence, or carelessness add up to your because it could take you a year to make it up with your best efforts and working on it all the time. And that's true with FileMaker. It's true in life. 50 attaboys to get rid of one Avoid the Do everything you can to avoid the
Cool. Well, definitely true. Calvin, any final words on your end?
Don't promise anything you haven't done. That always causes a problem.
And Dave also had don't discharge your firearm into the customer. Yeah, which I always think is probably a good idea. Hopefully it's useful. Tomorrow we're going to be taking a decidedly different track back towards the live stream, so to technical. I'm going to bring up the broadcast schedule. I'm going to roll it over here real quick. So theoretically tomorrow we're talking about FileMaker 20, the missing milk carton, and then Thursday and Friday about FileMaker Linux. Should be much more exciting. Jacob Taylor will be talking about that. Dave and Calvin will be back working on their project, so I'll be off on my own. I want to say thank you to TK for once again kind of helping us out and covering. Dennis says, how do you tell a customer that their database needs fixing before and cleaning up? So this actually just happened to us. Dave and Calvin. Whoa, shoot, that's a really big Calvin. There we go. Thoughts on that, Calvin? How do you tell?
Yes. So if you can explain it to them, show them how what needs to be fixed is causing problems that the new features will rely on. And that's really going to show them that this is really what we need to do first. And sometimes, a lot of times what we'll run into is like unstored calculations that could be better written, and they would speed up the app. And so we say we really need to look at this before we fix these other problems, and you'll notice a speed improvement.
Yeah.
And so when you can get fix little problems like that get the low hanging fruit, then it paves the way to those new features.
If it's like, reasonably simple fixes, but there's some people that we have a gentleman we were talking about yesterday at he's one of our customers, but doesn't really like to hire us because we're too expensive, but he has a database from way back in the old day, and he doesn't have primary keys, and it's like very FileMaker flat file-ish from like the old days. And we've tried to explain to him, hey, you really need to rebuild this, and he's like, it's good enough for now. And so it's kind of sometimes a hard conversation to have. It may not be a good fit. If you have a customer who doesn't want to invest to fix the problems, that's called a clue that you have a customer that you may not want to be hanging out with. There are customers who have fundamentally really bad systems that have to be totally overhauled, right? And so that's a harder conversation to have, but it can happen.
John Haggerty has a good question. If you never do what you haven't done, how do you get better? And the point wasn't
we're not saying don't do it.
Do anything you haven't done. Never promise anything you haven't done.
Like it'll take exactly 5.5 hours for me to build this module that talks to IoT, which talks to the tractor robot AI, right? You have no idea how long it'll take, right? It doesn't mean you can't do it. And so the customer goes, well, how long might it take? And you go, well, why don't I spend 2 or 3 hours and play with it and then come back to you and we can have another conversation, right? And if you have a relationship, a good relationship, the customer's and they know you're not going to fundamentally screw them, then someone came to me, I'd be like, yeah, give me 3 hours and we'll come back and see, and then give me a better idea. And then that gives the customer a chance to abort, right? So it's not that you don't do it, it's that you don't promise how long it's going to take. And if it's really out there, you don't promise you can do it at all, right? Like if I really wanted to have FileMaker talk to IoT on a tractor robot, that's a big stretch. But for example, I have never personally coded FileMaker with DocuSign. I know it can be done. I've seen other engineers who have done it. Therefore, I know it can be done. I just don't know how long it would take me to do it. So I'd be happy to explore it with a customer, and I would get that experience, right? And most customers, and maybe, to be honest with you, you might take like a two-way street. Like, okay, I've never done DocuSign before. My normal hourly rate is blah, but how about I give you 25 or 30% off while I kind of learn my way through this or come up with some sort of little Scooby snack, a little trade action so the person feels better about you kind of learning it, right? There's ways of doing this where people don't feel like they're getting screwed, right? That's the whole idea, right? So, all right, cool.
We're back to the win-win.
Win-win. We want a win-win. We always want win-win, right? All right, Dave, anything else? We good?
I think we're good, sir.
Awesome. Have a good day, everyone. We'll catch you tomorrow, hopefully. Otherwise, it could be very exciting if we have nothing to talk about. That could be bad.
cool, collected the quarterback. Great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Try to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap, stands in, throws it left for Amendola, reaches up and snacks a high throw and lands inside the 10, rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but Danny makes the grab.